October 5th marks 11 years since Apple co-founder Steve Jobs passed away after a prolonged battle with cancer, and the company that started in his parents' garage is now valued at over $2 trillion. With enormous revenues and profits, Apple Incorporated is one of the biggest companies in the world. The Apple CEO stated that the company's enormous financial success, which at the time of the interview had just surpassed Microsoft's market capitalization, in one of his final public interviews at D8 in 2010, doesn't matter very much. It's not what's important. It's not what makes you come to work in the morning. It's not why any of our customers buy our products. 11 years after his death, the company has spent hundreds of billions of dollars repurchasing its own stock and additional billions chasing cool with the acquisition of Beats and the launch of Apple TV+. And although many customers might not notice a difference, Apple no longer pays the same close attention to detail that Steve Jobs did when he was the CEO. Many to this day believe the company has changed and has neglected many of its core principles. Steve Jobs once in an interview discloses his goal for Apple, and it was to make premium products that one would recommend to anybody close to them, and he just did not want to sell junk. But ever since his death, Apple has changed from being an underdog driving innovation and risk-taking in the late 1990s and early 2000s to a company focused on iteration and maintaining market share today. But first, let's talk about the man who made everything possible and changed the future of smartphones and computers forever. Steve Jobs knew he was special from an early age. As many of us, he was teased at school. Jobs was an adopted kid. Even before school, Steve could already read. For the first several years, he was bored, so he kept himself busy by getting into trouble. It came clear it was in his nature to not accept authority, and later said, "They came close to beating any curiosity out of me." This turned into a pattern, as Jobs also quickly became bored with college. Jobs refused to go to classes he was assigned to, and instead went to the ones he wanted, such as dance class, where he could enjoy creativity. He was unwilling to accept truths as given and insisted on independently verifying everything. Several movements as well as spiritual communities with yoga, meditation, sensory deprivation, and many more were famously influential for Jobs. Flower power, enlightenment, and technology coming together with Steve as he meditated in the mornings and dropped in physics classes in the day, worked nights at Atari, and dreamt of starting his own business. "There's something going on here," he said, looking back on the time in history. In 1971, Steve Wozniak met Steve Jobs met each other for the first time. Jobs was still in high school, and Wozniak was a freshman in college. They got introduced by a mutual friend named Bill Fernandez. Fernandez and Wozniak were good friends during high school and even built a computer together called the Cream Soda computer. The reason why Wozniak and Jobs got introduced is quite a funny story, as Wozniak recounts. "We first met during my college years while he was in high school. It was 1971 when a friend said, 'You should meet Steve Jobs because he likes electronics and he also plays pranks.' So he introduced us. Pranks and a strong love for electronics were the basis of one of the most epic partnerships in the modern age. And it was due to a mutual friend that facilitated that first handshake. Bill Fernandez ended up working for Apple as employee number 4 and helped design the Apple I. What happened after this is of course known history, but it all might have never happened if it wasn't for Bill Fernandez." Jobs' first serious venture was alongside his partner Steve Wozniak, which was to build and sell printed circuit boards. After selling their most prized possessions, they now had with their own savings $1,300 in working capital, the design of a product and a plan, and they had started their own computer company. In 1977, Jobs and Wozniak valued their company at $5,307. 4 years later, they decided to take it public. By the end of 1980, Apple was valued at $1.79 billion. In the process, it would make 300 people millionaires, and at the age of 25, Jobs was worth $256 million. Now, 10 years after Apple founder Steve Jobs' death, the firm has grown into a colossus of devices and services that is the world's most valuable company. But the tech legend's die-hard fans lament its lost aura of revolution. Disappointed tweets like, "Apple doesn't innovate anymore," and "Steve Jobs is spinning in his grave" are common, especially during product introductions overseen by Tim Cook, who took over running Apple in August 2011. Jobs, who passed away on October 5, 2011, following a battle with pancreatic cancer, appeared to have left his demanding intensity in the company's DNA. Cook uses the same exaggerated language that Jobs previously did at every launch to announce even minor upgrades to the cameras or chips in its assortment of smartphones, tablets, and other gadgets. But in the post-Jobs world, are these advancements truly game-changing? In its 45 years of existence, Apple has experienced numerous close calls, and it is safe to argue that the iPod saved the firm when it first came out 20 years ago. Like many of the items it has produced over the years, MP3 players were not created by Apple. When Apple started distributing the iPhone in 2001, there were a lot of rival products already available on the market.
You ever wonder what this pocket's for? I've always wondered that. Well, now we know, because this is the new iPod Nano.
The iPod is a prime example of how Apple operated successfully under Steve Jobs' direction, since it was simple to use and offered a stylish method to browse through thousands of songs and arrange them however you liked. And it was pocket-friendly. For $3 billion, Apple Incorporated purchased Beats by Dre on May 28, 2014. This is still one of the biggest purchases the business has ever made, and it ultimately prompted the launch of Apple Music. Although Apple Music was the company's first foray into subscription-based streaming music, the acquisition marked a significant change from Apple's self-sufficient approach to the creation of products, programs, and services. With Apple Music, it seemed as though the business was making its first foray into the cool-buying market. With their wonderful and legendary marketing efforts, iTunes and iPod never really seemed to need that extra boost, and 7 years after the acquisition, it is difficult to comprehend why the business decided to partner with Beats. When the Beats by Dre partnership was announced, Apple CEO Tim Cook remarked, "Music is such an important part of all of our lives and holds a special place within our hearts at Apple. That's why we have kept investing in music and are bringing together these extraordinary teams so we can continue to create the most innovative music products and services in the world." Although it makes sense that Apple Music exists, customers who were accustomed to the simple navigation of the iPod app found the service to be less user-friendly after it was made available on iOS. Users must select Library to access their personal iTunes music library because 4 out of the 5 buttons on the new music app's bottom push Apple Music. According to many people, this represented a significant step back from what made the iPod the most popular music player. According to users, a dedicated app for Apple Music, or at the very least, the capability to alter the bottom row of buttons as in earlier iOS releases, would have been desired. The iPod app wasn't broken when the first iPhone was released in 2007, and the current music app design is a prime example of Apple promoting its services through excessively user-friendly and simple UI design at the expense of iOS as a platform. At Macworld in 2007, Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, which had an operating system that was genuinely groundbreaking.
A phone and an internet communicator. An iPod. A phone. Are you getting it? And we are calling it iPhone.
The iPhone was a magnificent package of emphasis that started a whole new era for smartphones. Even though the firm didn't invent multi-touch technology, Apple had a 5-year head start in software development when the iPhone first came out, but it has since lost that advantage. It goes beyond that, but the most recent release of iOS 15 shows how iterative changes to the operating system have become. Apple no longer releases new features that set it apart from the competition. The majority of the iOS 15 announcements at WWDC 2021 were features that had been available on Android for years. People talked about widgets for much too long, and they keep making design modifications that take the iOS experience further and further from the intended user experience. With the launching of Apple Maps and the introduction of iOS 6, things started to truly go south. In the past, Apple and Google collaborated on several fantastic iOS apps for Google Maps and YouTube, with Apple contributing to the front-end design. As Google's Android operating system gained popularity, it seems likely that Steve Jobs would have pushed for an Apple Maps app as well, but users sincerely doubt that he would have released it in that dismal form. Because of the disastrous Apple Maps launch, Tim Cook was forced to apologize, and Scott Forstall eventually left the organization. Forstall, who is recognized as one of the brightest engineers to have ever worked at Apple, has his name on numerous patents for iPhone features that are still in use today. Apple appointed industrial design guru Jony Ive to oversee the development of the iOS software after Forstall left, ushering in a new era of flat design. I couldn't help but think that Steve Jobs probably wouldn't have done it because it represented a significant change from the skeuomorphic design of the majority of Apple software products. This was also the case with iOS 7. When it comes to the Mac, well, Mac is no longer for creative professionals. You know that if they'd ever used a computer, it would have been a Mac, said Steve Jobs about the historical icons featured in the Think Different brand advertising campaign that kicked off his second tour of duty as Apple CEO. In 1997, when the company's finances were in disarray, Jobs eliminated existing product lines and reduced their offers. Customers would get to see the new iMac unveiled just 1 year later. Despite some rather strange design choices, that product marked a turning moment for Apple. For the next 20 years of the business expansion, the Mac was back and in the spotlight. With its Mac series, Apple gradually reclaimed market share for PCs over the following 10 years. Their ability to develop and modify content on computers was a major emphasis of many of their marketing campaigns. The debut of the really professional software package Final Cut Pro was influenced by software options like iMovie and commonly featured movie directors in Mac announcements and advertisements. The Mac's internal power has declined over the last 10 years, and many creative professionals have completely abandoned the platform as a result of the product line's inability to stay up with rivals. Many MacBook Pro and Mac Pro models cost more than those of their rivals, while sporting less powerful technology. While many creative professionals have switched to Windows PC workstations, Apple continues to use incredibly inadequate AMD GPUs in the majority of its Mac products. Another sign that Apple is drifting further away from what made them the counterculture PC firm of the late 19s is the lack of NVIDIA GPU support across the board. But to be fair, much of this was started while Steve Jobs was still alive. And unfortunately, financial engineering is some of the only innovation left at Apple. Apple's stock price was one item that Steve Jobs did not particularly care about. He led the company as CEO through numerous bad markets without ever paying a buyback or dividend. Because of his penchant for saving money, Apple was in excellent financial standing at the time of his death in 2011. Before Jobs returned to the firm in 1995, Apple had stopped paying a dividend as their finances were in disarray. Tim Cook and the board of directors of Apple announced a significant share buyback and declared a dividend less than a year after the passing of Steve Jobs. Apple has returned roughly $200 billion to stockholders after 9 years. Iteration in place of innovation and carelessness with small details is what also seems to haunt the company. Steve Jobs responded that the company didn't want to be a content generator because they believed that other people did a better job at that during the 2010 shareholders meeting when asked why Apple didn't buy a gaming studio or Netflix. In 2010, Apple was content to serve as a showcase for popular mobile games and video streaming apps, but times have changed in Cupertino. The post-Jobs period at the company's most "Hey fellow kids" moment has been Apple TV+. Apple is investing millions of dollars in good TV shows, but they have not disclosed their subscriber counts. With an emphasis on recurring revenues, Wall Street analysts have reiterated the stock with a focus on the company's services revenue sector, one of their fastest-growing divisions. This, to many users, is just another instance of Apple prioritizing shareholder satisfaction before creating something truly innovative. Across numerous product areas, Apple's rival company continues to display a disappointing lack of attention to detail. Many of Jobs' fanatical attention to detail is missing from the majority of the product lines, such HomePods leaving rings when used on hardwood tables, and the huge camera hump that causes the iPhone 13 Pro to sway when used on a flat table. His father Paul instructed him to paint on both sides of the fence, according to a narrative in the Walter Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs. Jobs used that lesson to his work at Apple, devoting numerous hours and days to an aspect that no one would ever see or notice. A lot of people would agree that the most badly missed feature of Jobs' management style is his attention to detail. His obsession with improving and user-friendly software, manufacturing techniques, products was borderline despotic. Recent changes made by Apple to all of their products appear to be headed in the opposite direction. Apple has genuinely gotten caught up in the trap of tackling problems that don't exist rather than innovating. Nobody requested a touch bar to take the place of the MacBook Pro's F keys. In actuality, the elimination of the Escape key prompted a further exodus from Macs. MagSafe wireless charging has been brought back, which is great, but the company's exclusive Lightning port still limits the range of iPhone products. Even if Jobs may have had a hand in some of these unpleasant design choices, it is plainly obvious from the company's failures over the last 10 years that they lack an idea guy. Even if the business made a bad design choice, Jobs would find a way to make it look good. Since Steve Jobs' passing 10 years ago, Apple has evolved into the mocked entity it once was. They portrayed the Mac and their company as a counterculture symbol to be considered as the little guy in their 1984 advertisement. With a market valuation of over $2 trillion, that is undoubtedly challenging, but we are beginning to observe the corporation acting in the manner in which Jobs portrayed Microsoft in the 90s and 2000s. This is illustrated in the context of the App Store by the Epic Games' SHIB Apple Incorporated case. The dispute continues despite Apple's ability to refute Epic's antitrust charges that its creation of a walled garden for apps was anti-competitive. Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games, is presently in the same situation as Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs in 1984. Sweeney is prepared to forego millions of dollars in Fortnite mobile income in order to uphold his moral position about the metaverse. Apple CEO Tim Cook, who is obviously highly focused on the company's financial performance, has a fascinating foil in Sweeney. In many aspects, even those unrelated to the company's offerings in terms of goods and services, software, and interactions with rivals, Apple has evolved into the reviled entity of the past. The Apple II hashtag has been used in scores of publications in recent months, and several Medium blog entries have recently made headlines. Numerous accounts exist of women, the LGBT+ community, and other minorities at Apple being disregarded by management and HR. This may not be a result of Steve Jobs' absence, but it does serve as a reminder that Apple is no longer the revered brand that its customers once were during the iPod era or even the early years of the iPhone's ascent. Although CEO Tim Cook faces many challenges in leading the technological behemoth known as Apple Incorporated, A round of applause should be granted for being able to succeed one of the greatest tech executives in history with very strong financial results. However, it has become abundantly clear that 10 years after the passing of Steve Jobs, Apple is simply not the same. Although it appears that the corporation is currently coasting on the efforts of Steve Jobs and the team who carried out the most incredible corporate turnaround in the past 30 years, it's possible that they do have one more thing in their R&D facility that will truly blow us away.